Hello, this is Judy, and for the next hour, I will be reading from the Toronto Star issue of January the 12th, 2026, on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. I will do my best to pronounce all words and names correctly, yet please forgive me if I do not. Here we go. Here, the first article is a Star exclusive. Canadians' pandemic drinking habits have stuck. Here's how bad it's gotten, according to new report. And this is the Center for Addiction and Mental Health report says while some may be drinking less overall, others are engaging in riskier patterns of alcohol use. And this is comparing a 2019 to a 2025 study showed stark changes in some drinking habits of Canadians. And this article is written by Omar Mosleh, Mosleh, who is a staff reporter. Canadians are drinking more frequently than they did before the pandemic, with a new report showing a rise in both daily alcohol consumption and weekly binge drinking since 2019. Documented in the 2025 Center for Addiction and Mental Health Monitor e-report released Monday, the findings suggest that habits formed during COVID-19 have not switched back to previous levels and may be contributing to higher levels of psychological distress. Haley Hamilton, a co-director of CAMH's Institute for Mental Health Policy Research, said issues such as alcohol dependence and distress increased in 2020, which was not unexpected. In quotes, there was a sense once the pandemic waned and things got back to normal, then things might revert back to their 2019 pre-pandemic levels. But things have not, Hamilton said. We can see that it continues to have impacts on people. The study compares estimates of substance use and mental health indicators in 2025 alongside select previous years, including 5 years ago, 2020, 10 years ago, 2015, as well as the year immediately before COVID. Over 49 years, the study conducted 39 repeated cross-sectional surveys among adults 18 and older across Ontario between 1977 and 2025. Comparing 2019 to 2025 showed some of the starkest changes. The one indicator that actually went down when comparing 2019 to 2025 was people who reported drinking at all over the last year. So, it's not like we're seeing more people drinking alcohol, but the people who are drinking alcohol are drinking it differently, said Dr. Leslie Buckley, chief of the Addictions Division of CAMH. In regard to alcohol consumption, daily drinking among drinkers increased by 3% between 2019 and 2025. Weekly binge drinking, or five or more drinks on a single occasion, increased by 3.6%. Hazardous or harmful drinking, which looks more at early signs of alcohol dependence, increased by 3.3%, while symptoms of alcohol dependence increased by 4.7%. Buckley said the data on binge drinking is important because while public health officials often emphasize the harms of long-term consumption of alcohol in the body, binge drinking is associated with different kinds of harms like falling, accidents, and relationship and legal issues. The other concerning report findings. While the change in alcohol habits was one of the study's major findings, there are also many other concerning health indicators. Overall, more people are using both illicit and prescription drugs, and there has been a big spike in people reporting mental distress and poor mental health. Among the overall sample, people reporting moderate to serious psychological distress more than doubled, from 17.7% in 2019 to 36.7% in 2025. Reports of fair or poor mental health rose from 12.9% in 2019 to 29% in 2025, nearly a third of the population. Suicide ideation also increased from 3.9% to 6.4%. One trend that Buckley highlighted as striking is how non-medical use of prescription opioid pain relievers has nearly tripled, rising from 5.3% in 2019 to 14.7% in 2025. It means that people are using it either recreationally or I think actually even more likely to self-treat, whether it's psychological or physical issues that they're having, Buckley said. And then there's a chart with the dangerous trends, and it's showing the significant changes between 2019, pre-COVID-19, and 2025 among the overall sample. And the studies, the parts they looked at, the questions were drinking alcohol in the past year, daily drinking amongst drinkers. And drinking alcohol in the past year has decreased 3.7% in those years. Daily drinking among drinkers has increased 3%. Weekly binge drinking, which is 5 or more drinks, has increased 3.6% in those years. Hazardous or harmful drinking is increased 3.3%. Symptoms of alcohol dependence has increased 4.7%. Cannabis use in the past year has increased 3.7%. Cocaine use during lifetime has increased 6.8%. Any use of prescription opioid pain relievers has increased 5.3%. Non-medical use of prescription opioid pain relievers has increased 9.4%. Moderate to serious psychological distress has increased 19%. Serious psychological distress has increased 8.8%. Use of prescribed anti-anxiety medication has increased 8%. Use of prescribed antidepressant medication has increased 6%. Fair or poor mental health has increased 16.1%. Frequent mental distress days, which is more than 14 during the past 30 days, has increased 5.4%. Suicide ideation has increased 2.5%. Fair or poor health in general has increased 7.1%. And the source of this is the CAMH monitor. Men and women struggling in different ways. The report found some differences among demographics when looking at data specifically from 2025. Men were more likely to report daily drinking, daily smoking, weekly binge drinking, driving after drinking, and symptoms of alcohol dependence, as well as use of nicotine pouches, e-cigarettes, and cannabis. Women were more likely to report moderate to serious psychological distress, use of antidepressants and anti-anxiety medications, and fair or poor self-rated mental health. There is an ongoing trend of men having increased substance use and problems related to use, while rates of mental health wellness are trending lower in women, Buckley said. This is not new and may demonstrate different expressions of underlying struggles. Adults 19 to 29 years old were more likely than their older counterparts to report weekly binge drinking, drinking hazardly, and symptoms of alcohol dependence, as well as e-cigarette and cannabis use, including driving after cannabis use. They reported many of the mental health challenges being seen across the board, but they also noted worries about climate change risk. Adults 65 years and older were more likely than their younger counterparts to report daily drinking, fair or poor overall health, as well as frequently physically unhealthy days. While the researchers agree that the pandemic almost certainly played a role in the changes they're seeing, others said the last decade has been difficult for many, pointing to the housing and affordability crisis, geopolitical instability, and existential crises. Stephen Jordan, a professor of psychology at the University of Toronto Scarborough said a key factor was how the pandemic ruptured social and family relationships. We were already moving towards more isolated, less socially connected lives before COVID, he said. COVID accelerated this trend. Social connection is our great stress insulator. Without it, mental health issues arise, as do attempts at things like self-medication. And Omar Moshli is a Toronto-based reporter covering social issues for The Star. You can reach him here, OMARMOSLEH @thestar.ca. The next article is an opinion article, and the title is There's Something You Might Not Have Noticed About Olivia Chow's 2026 Toronto Budget. And there's a picture with many people, and it's Mayor, in the forefront is Mayor Olivia Chow, and the sign in front of her says affordable, caring, and safe. And the caption reads, Mayor Olivia Chow and her budget chief, Shelley Carroll, announced Toronto's 2026 budget last Thursday. And this photo was taken by Andrew Francis Wallace of the Toronto Star. And this article is written by Edward Keenan, who's a city columnist, and he's a Toronto-based city columnist for the Star. And you can reach him via email, ekeenan@thestar.ca. Mayor Olivia Chow launched her re-election campaign last week, just not officially. On the record, Chow has refused to answer questions about her plans for the election this fall, but her announcement of an astonishing low 2.2% property tax increase in the 2026 Toronto budget makes it unmistakable the campaign is underway. When it comes to the general residential tax rate, Chow said Torontonians have been telling her, in quotes, every dollar matters. Suddenly, the mayor, who campaigned in 2023 on, in quotes, moderate property tax increases before introducing the largest and third largest hikes in post-amalgamation, and I'll spell this out, AMALGAMATION history, seems to have caught the respect for taxpayers wave. In quotes, my 2026 budget is focused on one thing, making your life more affordable, Chow said. The first thing you might have noticed about the number 2.2 is that it's the current rate of inflation. The second thing you might have noticed, it matches the lowest tax increase former Mayor John Tory ever introduced in 2021. It will strike careful followers of municipal affairs that Tory, who for 2+ terms in office made affordability his mantra, defining it almost entirely in terms of keeping property taxes low, is one of Chow's likely opponents in the election. Chow's own definition of affordability notably includes reinforcing measures through city services. In her announcement last Thursday, she proposed expanding library hours so that all branches would be open 7 days a week, extending free student meals to every school in the city, holding TTC fares flat, and introducing a MetroPass-style cap on monthly fares for frequent riders. There's no new flashy public program in the shop window this year, but the shelves aren't bare either. Many will remain skeptical, and reasonably so, about how she can achieve all of this without jeopardizing city services. From a quick review of the budget outline, Toronto's shelter system seems the most at risk. It's facing a nearly 14% cut, totaling $126 million per year. Chow's administration says refugee numbers are down, and the mayor herself said the feds have come through with funding for those who are still around. It also points out that the capacity is growing, with 6 new shelters slated to open in the next few years. But today, this year, this season, presents an important high-stakes test. Every year in recent memory, we've left people freezing in the streets at night, even as we doubled and tripled our shelter budget. Can we be sure the same thing won't happen now that we're making the cuts instead? With all that aside, there doesn't appear to be sufficient slashing in the budget to keep the tax rate low. So how is Chow doing this? In part, Toronto is benefiting from the compounded effects of her past higher than usual tax hikes. The 25% cumulative increase from the past 3 years, the one mayoral contender Brad Bradford likes to complain about, is now baked into our rates. Chow is also partnering in the Toronto tradition of kicking the can down the road by making use of reserve funds, as Tory and former Mayor Rob Ford routinely did. Meanwhile, the TTC board expressed concerns last week about the, in quotes, terrifying outlook for Toronto Transit if the Ontario government doesn't deliver a mass injection of operating funds. Interesting that. See, there's another possible audience for this budget besides voters. Premier Doug Ford, with whom Chow has enjoyed an unexpectedly chummy and fruitful relationship. One way Chow has been able to deliver a budget like this is the, quote, new deal she negotiated with the premier to put billions of dollars into the city coffers. You know what Ford loves? Spending money. You know what he hates? Tax increases. Chow took to social media last week, apparently in response to Bradford and Tory talking on the radio about the prospect of big tax increases. In quotes, no one is interested in new taxes. That's not on the table, Chow said. Not for us or the premier, not even discussing it. It may be that Chow crafted this budget to keep Ford on side for the municipal election campaign and inclined to bankroll for the city for another term. That's just a guess. I haven't heard anyone say as much. Granted, I haven't heard Chow said she intends to run again, but she certainly fired the starter's pistol. This next article is under federal politics, and it's an analysis. And the title is Mark Carney seeks a reset with China amid Donald Trump's chaos and global tensions. Can he succeed where others have failed? The Prime Minister in Beijing is bound to elevate engagement on trade, energy, agriculture, and international security. And there's a picture of two men, and it's Mark Carney, and it's Chinese President Xi Jinping, and that's Jinping, and they're shaking hands, and it's at the start of a meeting in Gyeongju, South Korea, last October. Carney heads to high-level meetings in China Tuesday in a bid to secure new ties on trade, energy, agriculture, and international security. And the photo I was looking at was taken by Adrian Wild, W-I-L-D, and it's a Canadian Press file photo. This article is written by Tonda McCharles, who is an Ottawa bureau chief. Canadian prime ministers have all taken different tacks to their China expeditions. Jean Chrétien, Chretien, led planes full of business leaders on the four, quote, Team Canada trade missions to China. Paul Martin sought to deepen ties accompanied by opposition and Liberal MPs who voiced human rights concerns. Stephen Harper broached Beijing with a sharply skeptical eye, vowing he never sacrificed values for the almighty dollar, but later inked an investment protection deal and brought back pandas. Justin Trudeau once pursued free trade and an extradition treaty with China as a way to diversify away from an unpredictable America in Donald Trump's first term as president, only to see those efforts collapse after Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping flexed their geopolitical muscle. The U.S. and China weaponized terrorist detentions and a pandemic supply chain crisis to assert power and global influence, and Canada was left to triangulate loyalties and rivalries with little success. Now, Mark Carney, the former central banker and economics technocrat, is Beijing bound on Tuesday to elevate engagement on trade, energy, agriculture, and international security, according to his office, amid the new year of chaos of Trump's second presidential term. Carney has to go there, said Jody Thomas, former national security advisor to the Trudeau government, in quotes, because we have to be in all the uncomfortable places, having uncomfortable conversations if we're going to build alternative markets to the U.S. The challenge is in walking the line in what we want from them and not in what they want from us, she said. We have to go in eyes wide open because we're not changing them. In essence, Carney's challenge remains the same as always: how to expand markets for Canadian products, but not to the point of overdependence, how to align with Canada on big global challenges like climate change, how to press for restraint where China supports Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and preserving the ability to criticize Chinese violations of human rights or international law, whether in Taiwan, Hong Kong, or Xinjiang, and that's Xinjiang province, without facing punishing retaliation, and all while fencing off sensitive sectors: defense, technology, critical minerals, intellectual property from China's own demands. After China, Carney will fly off, not to court Japan or any other Asian ally, but to Qatar, the Middle East's latest power broker, where sovereign wealth fund investments might be lured to Canada. The Prime Minister then heads to the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland, where global government and business elites will gather. A senior Canadian official who spoke on condition they will not be identified in order to discuss plans that were still in the works said all of Carney's trips have had one main goal: to establish greater economic autonomy for Canada. And what that means to us is that we need more options and more strength. Obviously, with China, we're very much focused on the economic relationship and on reestablishing a firmer footing for our diplomatic relationship, the official said. Michael Kovrig, Kovrig, the former Canadian diplomat detained in China for 3 years, along with Michael Spavor, and that's Spavor, supports a plan for the Prime Minister to go to try to reset the relationship. The risk, he said in an interview, is to get so excited about having got the meeting and seeing that there is progress that you make compromises that seem inconsequential in the short term, but then over the long term can lead to problems. Kovrig, like many China observers, said that the trade and security balance will be a tricky one to strike. It's a risk, I think, for all of the high-flying Davos set that is used to having polite meetings with senior Chinese officials and mainly having technocratic discussions and not being mindful enough about the other side of the Chinese state, which is the security apparatus and the political hardliners within the Chinese Communist Party, and sort of forgetting that ultimately the agenda that the Chinese Communist Party is pursuing is largely hostile and harmful to Canada's national interests. But Kovrig said that Carney's expertise and stature and Canada's resources represent bargaining power, and if he's willing to use it to pursue People's Republic of China officials to moderate their aggressively mercantilistic economic policies that are driving massive overproduction and flooding foreign markets. The Prime Minister lands in China Wednesday with 2 days of meetings planned with the Chinese President and Premier Li Qiang, Qiang. The rest of the schedule is not yet public. Professor Irwin Cotler, Cotler, a former Justice Minister, co-chair of the Interparliamentary Alliance on China, and international chair of the Raoul Wallenberg Center for Human Rights, wants Carney to press the Chinese government to release pro-democracy, Hong Kong-based media tycoon Jimmy Lai, LAI, from prison, among a host of human rights issues. I'm in favor of a strategic engagement, said Coulter in an interview. I'm in favor of fostering and advancing, as we can, economic issues of benefit to both countries, security issues of benefits to both countries, but not at the expense of human rights. The concerns need not be raised publicly, Coulter said, and may not bring a resolution, but if Canada remains silent, not only will there not be any resolution, but, in quotes, the Canadian government will continue to believe that they can continue with these violations in impunity. However, Carney's team is clearly not set to have those talks in public. In quotes, we don't want to go back to diplomacy via the press, said the senior official. Rather, the Prime Minister expects to mainly have such conversations in private. In quotes, the Prime Minister has been very clear with the Chinese leadership and that's our goal, that we want a relationship without surprises, and that there are going to be things that we're not comfortable with, and we'll let them know. And I think that they appreciate it. Korvik supports that approach, but he said, in quotes, speaking as a former political prisoner and hostage, the other thing that I would really like to see from this visit, even if it's not spoken about publicly, is for Mark Carney to press for the release of other Canadians and foreign citizens who are detained in China for political reasons, or at least more humane treatment and better and more reliable consular access for them. Carney is not bringing a big business delegation. Along for the China leg are cabinet ministers for foreign affairs, industry, energy, agriculture, and international trade, his parliamentary secretary, who has made a couple of advance visits, and its newest Liberal MP, former Conservative for Markham-Unionville, Michael Ma. The Conservatives, whose leader, Pierre Poilievre, faces a review in a few weeks, have frequently trashed the World Economic Forum in a rage-bait social media post, but declined comment on the trip. Carney's team believes that Qatar and the Davos legs of this trip are important parts of the bigger play to diversify Canada's alliances. Veena Najabulla, and that's Nadjibulla, Vice President of Research and Strategy at the Asia Pacific Foundation of Canada, said success for Carney in China would be to get some, in quotes, specific concrete wins or deliverables on the economic side, both in terms of new opportunities, especially in the energy sector, but also in terms of movement on the tariff issue. But she also warns that while Beijing is keen to frame the visit as a renewal of the 2015 strategic partnership with Canada, in quotes, we're simply on a very different movement now. China is not just a partner, China is also a competitor and a rival. She also said that just because the kind of relationship we have with the U.S. has changed, in quotes, doesn't mean that PRC's behavior or the threats and challenges emanating from PRC have changed. Lynette Ong, O-N-G, a professor of Chinese politics at the University of Toronto and director of the China Government Lab at the Munk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy, said China has its own reasons to try to build, in quotes, a better relationship with a lot of countries, especially given the geopolitical tension with the United States. And Canada is one of those countries that I think China wants on its side or to have a warmer relationship with out of economic necessity. If that emerges from the Beijing visit, Carney will possibly have secured something not many of his immediate predecessors did, a stronger strategic engagement with the world's second largest economy at a time when it matters. And Tanda McCharles is an Ottawa bureau chief and a senior reporter covering federal politics. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Toronto Star on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. The next article is under Leafs, and it is an opinion article. No NHL coach is safe, but Craig Burbu can breathe a little easier on this Maple Leafs road trip. And this article is written by Dave Feschuk, Feschuk, who is a sports columnist for The Star. Say this for the compressed NHL standings. If they're gold for Commissioner Gary Bettman, who can brag about the manufactured parity that's left the vast majority of the 32 teams credibly in the playoff hunt for most of 2 weeks into the new year, they also seem pretty good for head coaches. Well past the halfway point of the season, not a single one has been fired heading into Sunday, perhaps because so few teams have fallen out of the race. Last year, at the same point, 4 head coaches had already been relieved of their duties. The season before that, also 4. Maybe the closest thing has come in Toronto, where the Maple Leafs are 9 games removed from scapegoating assistant coach Marc Savard for the team's pre-Christmas struggles. You've heard of the notorious performance bump that comes with replacing a head coach. The Leafs have made the case that the same effect can be had by merely jettisoning an assistant. They've gone 7-0-2 since shaking the landscape with Savard's December 22nd axing, matching Toronto's longest points streak in more than 2 years. If swapping out assistants is undeniably cheaper, and they subsequently brought in Steve Sullivan to take Savard's place, in Toronto it has appeared to work like a charm. Not that Savard was the problem, although the power play he ran, which ranked dead last at the time and has found new life since, certainly was. But at a moment when head coach Craig Berube seemed at a loss to explain the Leafs' dismal collective effort, there was an obvious need for the kind of wake-up call that sometimes only a sacrificial firing can provide. The team, jolted to attention, has responded with a palpable on-ice urgency sense. In quotes, "We're healthier for sure. Goaltending has been better for sure," Berube was saying after Saturday's 5-0 win over the last-place Vancouver Canucks, explaining what's changed for the better since the Christmas upheaval. "We've scored goals all year. I know the power play hadn't, but we were scoring. We weren't defending before Christmas. We're defending a lot better and keeping the puck out of the net. That's the biggest difference for me." Indeed, defensive effort is supposed to be the lifeblood of Berube's straight-line system. The Leafs' inconsistency on that front has often explained their slumps. So it said something like that on Saturday after William Nylander announced his return from a 6-game injury absence with a goal and 2 assists. Berube plays Nylander's will more than his skill. Nylander got 3 points, and for me, it was the work, Berube said. Like he was skating, he was back-checking, stripping people of pucks. When he does that stuff, he can be a great player, obviously. For all Toronto's recent successes, they've still entered Sunday on the outside of the NHL playoff picture. As good as they've been, plenty of teams in the East have been reeling off wins too. Since the Leafs fired Savard, the Tampa Bay Lightning are 7-0, the Sabres are 7-1, the Canadian Red Wings and Islanders are 6-1. All 5 of those teams were residing in a playoff spot on Sunday morning. In other words, getting hot is great, but staying hot is what's required. And the challenge gets stiffer soon enough. 10 of Toronto's next 15 games, beginning with Monday's visit to the top of the league, Colorado, are on the road where they've struggled. It was a dismal 0-3 record on their most recent multi-game road trip that preceded the firing of Savard, whose power play was in the muck. Since then, the Leafs have scored 7 power play goals in 9 games, making good on the 35% of opportunities. The penalty kill is rolling too. Ranked a credible 6 when Savard was fired, it's been the best of the league since, giving up just 1 goal and 21 times shorthanded. Not to be overlooked, Toronto has ranked second in team save percentage since the assistant coach change. Show me a good coaching staff, in other words, and I'll show you a good goaltending corps. Beyond the numbers, the Leafs have been playing with a likable spirit that's been mostly absent during bleaker times this season. The friskiness of Saturday's win, highlighted by Max Domi's fight with the bigger Marcus Peterson and the spirited penalty killing of Scott Laughton, was a case in point. In quote, "You can see just everybody. I call it a pack of wolves. Get in there and stick up for your teammates and your goalie," Barbeau said. "We're tight right now, and we've got to keep being tight." It was worth noting that a lot of the praise Barbeau doled out on Saturday came with qualifiers. The Leafs are tight, in quotes, right now. Nylander, in quotes, can be great, in quotes, when he works. It's the outlook of a coach who knows that a franchise that recently fired an assistant coach couldn't have been far away from considering a change at head coach. It's the outlook of someone who knows that as good as things have been of late, they're never far from sliding sideways in a league where margins are minuscule. This next article is under business, and the title is Mattel Launches New Autistic Barbie as Part of Inclusion Mission. The doll includes articulated elbows and wrists, though she can make hand motions some autistic people use to help regulate their senses, called stimming or hand flapping. And there's a picture of the Barbie, and she's got on headphones, and she's holding like an iPad. And this is a picture from H.O. Mattel and its Canadian Press. And this is a picture of Mattel's new autistic Barbie doll. And this article is written by Nicole Thompson of the Canadian Press. If you look at the newest Barbie in the eyes, you may notice she doesn't look directly back at you. A slight shift to the gaze is one of the changes Mattel made for the latest addition to its fashionista line, Autistic Barbie. The doll is part of an initiative to represent more people, with other examples including Barbies with Down syndrome, blind Barbies who carry white canes, and Barbies with prosthetic legs. The newest doll was created in collaboration with the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network, which contributed ideas for how the doll could represent a range of experiences some people on the autism spectrum have. The doll includes articulated elbows and wrists so she can make hand motions some autistic people use to help regulate their senses, called stimming or hand flapping. She looks ever so slightly off to the side to mimic how some autistic people avoid direct eye contact, and she carries a detachable fidget spinner because some people find it a helpful sensory distraction. She also wears, in quotes, noise-canceling headphones to help reduce sensory overload, and she carries a tablet showing symbol-based augmentative or alternative communication apps on its screen to provide an alternative form of communication. In quote, autism has all different sizes and shapes, and so this really isn't to represent the only way that someone can experience autism. It's really just to have various cues that may be representative so different people can see themselves in this doll, said Jamie Seigelman, and that's Seigelman, Global Head of Dolls at Mattel. Figuring out what that might look like was challenging because autism encompasses a broad range of behaviors and difficulties that vary widely in degree, and many of the traits associated with the disorder are not immediately visible, said Noor Pervez, Pervez, and that's ASAN's Community Engagement Manager, who worked closely with Mattel on the Barbie prototype. The development team debated whether to dress the doll in a tight or loose-fitting outfit, Pervez said. Some autistic people wear loose clothes because they are sensitive to the feel of fabric seams, while others wear figure-hugging garments to give them a sense of where their bodies are, he said. The team ended up choosing an A-line dress with short sleeves and a flowy skirt that provides less fabric to skin contact. The doll also wears flat shoes to promote stability and ease of movement, according to Mattel. The addition of the autistic doll to the Barbie Fashionistas line also became an occasion for Mattel to create a doll with facial features inspired by the company's employees in India and mood boards reflecting a range of women with Indian backgrounds. Pervez said it was important to have the doll represent a segment of the autistic community that is generally underrepresented. The next article is opinion. Canada must stand up to Donald Trump, or there will be no one to stand up for Canada. And this is written by Mark Kirsten, Kersten, who's a contributor. And Mark Kirsten is an assistant professor of criminology and criminal justice at the University of the Fraser Valley. It is not just the attack on Venezuela, breaches of the United Nations Charter, or the illegal use of illegal force that still somehow left a dictatorship in place. It is not just the threats to annex Greenland or to make Canada the 51st state, both of which would violate the territorial integrity of sovereign states protected under international law. It's not just the admiration that U.S. President Donald Trump has for Russia's Vladimir Putin or Israel's Benjamin Netanyahu, both in the process of illegally annexing territory. And it's not just the sanctions issued against Canadian officials at the International Criminal Court, ICC, or defunding the UN. It's all of it. America is engaged in a full frontal, multi-pronged attack on what still exists of the international rules-based order and its institutions. And we are just 1 year into Trump's second 4-year term. Yet, the Liberal government of Prime Minister Mark Carney appears incapable of calling out the U.S. violations of international law. On Venezuela, Carney tried desperately to avoid condemning the illegal attacks, stating that, in quotes, Canada calls on all parties to respect international law. That stance is hopefully true every day, and so offers little during a concrete geopolitical crisis. When asked about whether American strikes on suspected Venezuela drug traffickers were legal, they aren't. Foreign Minister Anita Anand, A-N-A-N-D, said that it was, in quotes, within the purview of U.S. authorities to make the determination. In other words, Anand believes violators of international law get to decide if they violated international law. Such logic is not only wrong, but dangerous. It sets precedents for further breaches of international law, not only by autocrats like Putin in Ukraine and ICC suspects like Netanyahu in Palestine, but by China and Taiwan, as well as America and Greenland, and yes, even Canada. As Canada's former ambassador to the UN, Bob Rae says, in quotes, I don't think they're musings. The fickle figure of fate can point to us just as surely as it can point to Denmark or anywhere else. Now, some might argue that the Canadian government should pull its punches. It is facing a belligerent administration willing to incarcerate hundreds of Canadian citizens in ICE detention centers and imposing punishing tariffs on Canadians. Ottawa also hasn't secured a trade with Washington, and the last time a Canadian politician, Ontario Premier Doug Ford, irked Trump, the Washington kibosh progress towards a renewed trade partnership and tariff relief. Perhaps then, former Liberal advisor Brian Clough is right in insisting that on contacts like Venezuela, there's not much use hyperventilating about it or lecturing the United States. Canada has one main goal with the United States in the coming year. It's to navigate the USMCA review and to resolve the current tariffs. We've got to keep our eye on that ball. Such views prioritize the Liberal government's particular notion of pragmatic politics over principled action. But at what cost? Does Canada have a red line? If so, what does Trump have to do for the Canadian government to find its spine, let alone its elbows? The idea that Canada can secure a reasonable trade deal without robust protection of international law is preposterous. As a middle power, Canada benefits tremendously from the protections afforded by international law, including in the areas of trade and finance. The international rule of law is also what allows us to instinctively understand that acts of aggression and annexation aren't just wrong, but illegal. Canada's reputation as a country historically engaged in promoting respect for international law and resolving international conflicts is perhaps its most important calling card on the world stage. To those beyond our borders, it is part of the lore, the image, and the very idea of what Canada is. The Trump administration today poses the gravest threat to international law of any U.S. government in history, not only because of what it does, but because of the lawlessness it permits in contexts like Ukraine and Palestine. There is a cost. Every precedent and institution that is weakened puts more people and states at peril. The idea that somehow Canada can pull its punches forever and somehow be spared is delusional. Canada must find within itself, along with other states, to defend international law. It can do so with its traditional European allies and also with South America, American and African states, among others, who have been the most clear-eyed about defending international law and institutions from Trump's attacks. As Ray notes, in quotes, in our own self-interest, we have to work with other countries to do everything we can to stop the United States. Doing so would help diversify Canada's pool of close allies and perhaps even trading partners. The famous poem by Pastor Martin Niemöller, Niemoller, following the Second World War and the Holocaust imparts the wisdom that when perpetrators come for others, yet we remain silent, there will eventually be no one left to speak out when they come for us. Ottawa has remained silent as Trump attacked the ICC, and the UN remained mealy-mouthed on the unlawful tax on Venezuela and cannot bring itself to equivocally denounce Washington's obsession with annexing other states' territory. If the silence continues, who will stand up for us if Washington puts our own country in its crosshairs? This next article is in the business section, and the title is, How Much Does That Job Pay? Employers Still Failing to Comply with New Salary Transparency Laws. As of January 1st, job postings by employers with 25 or more workers are required to include salary ranges within $50,000 and alert prospective employees if artificial intelligence is used in the hiring process. And there's a photo of somebody looking for a job. It's a picture, job listings, and the caption is, The Star found dozens of job postings on platforms like LinkedIn and Indeed that either failed to list salaries or included salary ranges that exceeded $50,000. And the image is by Dreamstime. And this article is written by Sheila Reid, R-E-I-D, who is a staff reporter. Ontario's new pay transparency rules that came into effect January 1st were supposed to end confusion and wasted time in the job application process. But dozens of employers are still hiding salary ranges in online job postings. The province passed legislation as part of Ontario's Employment Standards Act that includes disclosure requirements for employers in online job postings. As of the new year, job postings by employers with 25 or more workers are required to include salary ranges and alert job hunters if artificial intelligence is used in the hiring process. For salaries less than $200,000, the range must be within $50,000. Salaries over $200,000 are exempt from the rules altogether. According to job posts on employment platforms, many companies have yet to comply with the new rules, causing some critics to worry about enforcement. Others say that the rules aren't targeted enough to inform applicants or rectify pay disparities. In quotes, "The current pay transparency rules are utterly pointless," said Faye Faraday of the Equal Pay Coalition, a nonpartisan group that advocates for women's pay equity in Ontario. In quotes, "This is a weak job posting provision and shouldn't be confused with real transparency." The Star canvassed online employment platforms such as LinkedIn, Indeed, and ZipRecruiter to find dozens of job postings across several sectors that either failed to list salaries or included salary ranges that exceeded $50,000. In quotes, "There really is little enforcement and no real indication of how this government is going to ensure that this act is put into place," says Ontario Federation of Labour President Laura Walton. Ontario's Minister of Labour said in an emailed statement that to ensure compliance, the government has doubled the maximum fine for individuals convicted under the Employment Standards Act from $50,000 to $100,000 and increased administrative penalties for repeat offenders from $1,000 to $5,000. The Equal Pay Coalition pointed to the Ford government's historically weak enforcement of employment standards that led to high levels of wage theft in Ontario in the last several years. Without enforcement, Walton says, the onus will be on workers to report non-compliant employers, something she says could present a professional risk for applicants and current employees. In quotes, "What are the chances that the person is going to be able to access that position after raising the flag," says Walton. In a statement to the Star, Ontario Labour Minister Dave Piccinini, P-I-C-C-I-N-I, said the, in quotes, "pre-employment framework of the new legislation will support workers during the hiring process." Quote, "Anyone looking for work deserves to know three things up front: what the job pays, whether the job is real, and how your application is being judged. This is about putting time, money, and power back into the hands of job seekers instead of leaving them guessing or wasting their energy on dead ends," read the statement. But Walton says the legislation isn't enough to give workers the information they need to make choices in the job market. "There is a big difference in a salary range of $50,000, said Walton. "It's a difference between having to work one or two jobs." Faraday said the current legislation allows employers to hide pay gaps, exacerbating already existing gender wage disparities. In quotes, "You could post something that says the pay range is $50,000 to $100,000, and you could hire a woman at $50,000 and hire a man at $100,000, and you would be complying with that act." Maria Constantine, a Toronto-based employer at law firm Casals, says there is value in increased pay transparency, but echoed that the pay range may have undesired effects across different demographics. In quotes, "We know that women, for example, are less likely to request a salary on the higher end of a salary range than male candidates," she said. In quotes, "Candidates from marginalized groups may fear that they are less likely to get the job unless they put forward an offer on the low end of the salary range." Language that stipulates a salary, in quotes, "up to a certain salary" is also non-compliant, says Constantine, noting that the lower end of that range could be minimum wage. On the other hand, Constantine says the requirements don't capture the complexity of some salaries that rely on bonuses and commissions. Salaries for jobs that are performance dependent, she says, don't necessarily fall within a $50,000 range. Constantine added that it may be the case that current employees could see a job posting for a position at their level in their company with a salary range that is higher than what they are currently making. In quotes, that could create some discontent, some morale issues among employees, said Constantine, adding that employers would benefit from identifying those gaps in advance. Effie Tsergas, Tsergas, founder at HR firm Human Capital, says employers would be wise to conduct a pay equity audit to correct pay gaps between employees who perform the same work. Tsergas said employers should be proactive in making sure that current wages align with those being posted for new jobs. In quotes, there are reasons why some companies have a large revolving door of people coming and going, says Tsergas. And so, by being forced to basically do the right thing, it's going to build a more positive environment. Sheila Reed is a staff reporter with The Star, a Toronto Star. She can be reached at shreid@thestar.ca. You have been listening to a reading of articles and features from the January 12th, 2026 issue of the Toronto Star. Your reader has been Judy. Thank you so much for the honor of reading to you and listening, and I hope you have an amazing day.